Me now is the Fitz-Gerald Group Principal, Keith Fitz-Gerald. Keith, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What's your reaction to all of this? Tariffs are coming next week. We still have a gain of 137 right now in the Dow Industrials this morning.
Well, they're two very different but related questions. Number one, traders know that they have to get ahead of what comes next, AI, tech, global trade, et cetera, because ultimately this will pass. With regard to the tariffs themselves, of course, China is going to react because China, to John's point just before the break, is playing from a position of weakness. So I think that we are ultimately going to see cooler heads prevail, but it is appropriate right now. And people forget, however controversial it is, that tariffs can set the stage for short-term pain but long-term gain.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, to hear this response from China, I didn't hear such a response when they had a surveillance balloon flying across the country, taking information from our military bases back to the Communist Party, right? Get on the right track, guys, CCP. I mean, unbelievable.
Well, and on top of that, the balloons contained U.S. components. So, I mean, It's like they used our components to do their thing.
Right. And then no response whatsoever from the U.S. until shooting it down after a week of its travel. Meanwhile, let me get your take. Keith, Meta is in talks to raise $35 billion for data center financing led by Apollo Global Management. Meta is also planning to debut a standalone AI app in the second quarter to compete with OpenAI's ChatGPT. Meanwhile, Nvidia is warning of growing competition from China's Huawei. Despite U.S. sanctions on Huawei, it says the telecom firm is a major contender in 4 categories, including chips, cloud services, computing processing, and network products. Keith, what do you want to do as an investor when you're hearing things like this?
Well, I think, number one, you want to understand that this is normal. Number two, you want to understand that CEO Jensen Huang absolutely knows his competition. You want to start listening to what he's saying very carefully because any prudent CEO is going to identify the opposition. So you want to know where you're going. And finally, this type of stuff, again, to my point just a moment ago, comes and goes. If you can identify quality CEOs making great products that are putting up numbers, competition is what you want to see because it stirs innovation, not fear.
Yeah, no, I see, but I'm wondering who's leading this charge in AI. Nvidia has been the lead here, but of course, Nvidia's stock has is way off of the highs of the last couple of years.
Well, again, I look at this and I say, okay, China's AI, if we look at it, they're using chips that are 70 to 80% of the inference level. They're mid to lower tier competition. So they're doing what they've done best, which is absorb technology from other areas of the world and make it their own. So are they going to be a real competitor? Absolutely. But are they going to be the competitor that maybe everybody thinks they are today? No. So if Nvidia can stay ahead of that, Team Green can win.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Meanwhile, we've got some economic data on the docket today. You've got the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation reading. The January PCE index coming out in about 2 hours' time, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. The expectations call for core month-over-month prices to be up 0.3% and up 2.6% year-over-year, Keith. We still see elevated inflation. How much of an issue is this for investors?
I'm not so sure it's And I mean, boy, this is tough, and because everybody's wallet's hurting, right? And I think that's what the data is going to show. The question is, who's hurting and how much? So I think the numbers are going to come in a little hotter than expected, but I also think that this is going to prompt the Fed to maybe figure out that it might need to actually be proactive instead of reactive.
Proactive meaning cuts in interest rates this year?
Well, exactly. Again, I don't think they can spell proactive, and that's harsh, but I think that this is a time when we need it. It reminds me of other pivotal points in history when we saw the European currency crisis, global financial crisis, maybe the rebound from the internet. The markets are trying to reassess opportunity, not fear, and the Fed can play, if it wanted to, a big role in that.
Well, I mean, look at the yield on the 10-year, John. The yield is all the way back down to 4.2% right now on the 10-year. Don't forget, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has said we are focused on the 10-year. We want to get that yield down. It is down for 5 straight weeks. So if you've got elevated inflation, that would indicate the Federal Reserve should be raising interest rates, not cutting. What's your take, John?
Well, my sense right now is that this latest decline by the 10-year yield reflects expectations of slower economic growth, slower spending growth that eventually will go far at helping to tame inflation, getting inflation down towards the Fed's 2% target. We did have a run-up earlier, but I think with the market now, when it looks at tariffs, it says, yes, near term, the imposition of tariffs may put upward pressure on price inflation. That will increase prices, but consumers will respond by cutting back on spending, and that will force some companies to go ahead and rescind price hikes that will help lead inflation lower. It seems as though the balance is shifting from fear of faster inflation to fear of slower economic growth, slower spending growth, and slower profits growth.
Yeah. Keith, you agree with that? Because, look, I mean, this market is rallying this morning. Forget about tariffs. Forget about conflicts across the world. This market is rallying on that drop in yields, in my view. What do you say?
I agree with that 100%, but I also think John makes some very, very sharp points. You know, the market is always going to do the Fed's job for it. The question is, why do we continue to listen to the Fed if the market already knows where it's going? I think it's focused on opportunity. That's what traders are looking for. I'm glad to see you guys finally putting a foot under this. I hope it continues.
All right, Keith, great to catch up. Thank you so much. Keith Fitz-Gerald joining us this morning. Stay with us. Quick break, and we'll be right back.